This is not just a beautiful classic car. This is one of the most successful cars of all time. In just 8 years, Mercedes-Benz sold 1.9 million of these Strich Acht saloons, and also coupes. There were ambulance versions, limousines. It's a fascinating car, fascinating history. It introduced quite a lot of new features for Mercedes-Benz, and it's still one of the most underrated classic cars you can buy. So the Strich Acht series cars were developed through the 1960s, launched in 1968, and were designed to slot in below the much larger Mercedes-Benz cars, which seems a bit amusing. It's actually enormous. I think when you see pictures of these cars, you don't fully appreciate just how enormous they are, but you certainly feel it when you're behind the wheel. But we've got obviously the very traditional grille at the front and the stacked headlights. So it's beautiful design by Paul Brack. He also designed the visually similar Pagoda Series SL, a truly beautiful car. And then went on to work at Peugeot for 20 years, where he worked on some of the more famous Peugeot cars. But it's just a lovely shape to the car, huge glass area, these dainty rear lights that tie in to the earlier SL. Later these were changed for larger ribbed units that tied it into later Mercedes cars. But it's just a clean, classy shape. It's absolutely beautiful. Under the bonnet, we find the mighty 4-cylinder engine, overhead cam, 4-cylinder in this case. You could get a 6-cylinder petrol as well. And there were also 4- and 5-cylinder diesel engine options. And that's where things get a little confusing, because a W114 designation means it has a 6-cylinder engine, and a W115 means it has a 4-cylinder engine, apart from when it has a 5-cylinder. So it's just right at the end of production they offered the 5-cylinder diesel engine, and it was diesel engines that really helped these cars sell in huge numbers. The long wheelbase version actually sold more often with a diesel engine than petrol. 78% of the long wheelbase ones were of the diesel engine, which is just remarkable, especially as the initial 2-litre diesel engine had 55 brake horsepower. Rather more on offer here. We've got 105 horsepower, about 130 pound-foot of torque at just 2,800 revs. So it's a bit of a slogger. It's not a sports machine, but it should be interesting to drive. This one has a somewhat checkered history. You may recall, if you follow the channel for a while, we have actually seen this car before. We helped him collect it after some engine work. It then needed rather more engine work in a panic before a wedding, which was all very exciting. So we have seen this engine literally inside and out, so go and check some more recent videos if you haven't. But yes, a huge range of engines which helped this car sell as taxis, as ambulances, but also as executive cars. And I think it's a tribute to Paul's delicious styling that this car was able to serve so many different markets. Something else that certainly helped this car with its taxi credentials was the impressive boot space. Despite being quite a low boot line, there is a lot of space there. A high lip, naturally, because that tended to be the norm at the time, but the spare wheel takes up very little room in here. There's an awful lot of space, and there's still something like a 60-litre fuel tank as well. Moving inside, first of all, just, oh, that's lovely. Yes, it all sounds very, very solid, and that tells you just how much Mercedes-Benz invested in the development of these cars. There is a brand new semi-trailing rear suspension that was then used throughout the entire model range. Everything was just designed to be incredibly robust, which is why they became such legendary taxis. But these are taxis with class. Look, we've got the beautiful chrome horn ring. Let's put the ignition on, and a nice little horn. It's very stylish, so that's how it manages to appeal to the taxi market, but also the executives. These were not particularly cheap cars when they were new. We've got indicators right on this massive lever here, which you push in like so to turn the wipers on and off, and then that changes the speed. That's a foot operated windscreen washer, so we've actually got an extra pedal up there in the corner, that is actually your screen wash up there. Handbrake by this control here that you twist and push in to release. I remember that very well from my W123 days. Fresh air vents here and also here. The heater controls, slightly confusing. This controls the temperature and it's dual zone. So we can set it different for each side of the car, which I find incredible for the 1960s. That controls the speed. That opens up the fresh air vent. This tells you whether you want the heat up at the windscreen or elsewhere in the car. There's a fairly modern stereo unit. We've got the obligatory ashtray, hazard warning light switch. Oh, look at that. You can almost feel the relay at work there. Ignition control here. This one is your choke for cold starting. Twist this one for lights. And that's it, really. There's not an awful lot going on here. This car has no options. It doesn't even have rear courtesy lights. It's got very, very little in the way of specification at all. But it does have these lovely little quarter window controls. That one seems to be coming off. Under opening quarter lights, this one doesn't quite seem to want to play today, but lovely winding mechanism, really quick ratio on it. But the enormous steering wheel and the somewhat laid back driving position, complete with center armrest, yeah, it just feels a very relaxing way to drive. I would say this isn't a car for driving quickly, but Tim has proved otherwise. But let's see what it's like in the back. Climbing aboard. Oh yes, so comfortable. And the other thing that strikes you is really good headroom. Again, very important for taxi duty. And I just want to point out the lovely armrest here that you pull up from below to act as a bit of a rest there. That's absolutely lovely. This one has had rear seat belts fitted really nicely. And they've gone for the 90s BMW style of having the over the shoulder in the middle of the car. No center belt. But a beautiful perforated vinyl headliner. We've got lovely elegant door handles. It's a really nice place to sit back here. There's enough space for my knees even behind me with these big chunky seats. Yeah, it's a fine way to travel. Just before we get started, there is a small matter of the glove box we forgot to explore. What's in here? Oh yeah, there's a little bit of storage in there. Islands Essentials, Einaudi. Good choice. Like a bit of Einaudi. Saw him live once. So let's start the car up. Look at this mechanical gear lever as well. It is definitely a very mechanical change. Lovely decals on the top. Well, it's not a decal, is it? It's kind of embossed in. Very, very nice. So ignition on. You will hear the heater fan running. It is still quite chilly today. Let's just turn that off for a moment. Listen to that idle. It just gently purrs away. Right, I'm told that if I press that... Oh yeah, there we go. So I can turn the wipers on with that foot and apparently get one wipe. But if I want more wipe, I have to press the end of the indicator stalk and then the wipers come on. And it's an interesting and somewhat beguiling pattern. The old clap hand wipers. Paul Bracker used these to good effect on the 115 here, and also the Pagoda SLs. It's a key part of their design as well. But we should go for a drive. So into first gear, twist the handbrake off. Right, there's a very characterful whine from the gearbox in first. I'm going to pop some lights on because we're a little bit gloomy today. So since we last travelled in the car on camera, the engine is so much quieter. It's had a complete top end rebuild and it sounds really, really nice now. So it's done a couple, well, it actually must be quite a few 100 miles since that rebuild. So it is nicely run in, but steering is nicely weighted, some heft because there is no power steering, but it feels really tight. There's very, very little play. and everything just feels so. I think what surprised me when we were driving it back from Lancashire is it handles really well as well. It's not like a sports car. The steering isn't quite accurate enough for that, but you can really punt it into bends, and Tim certainly was, far braver than I was, yeah, it just sticks to the road. It's a very fine handling car. One detail you may notice is the speedometer is actually reading in kilometers, and that's because this is actually a South African market car, but it was actually built in South Africa as well. And there were a number of production facilities around the world for these cars, which maybe helped them sell in such ridiculously strong numbers. I mean, that's almost 2 million cars. Bear in mind, Citroën sold only 3.8 million 2CVs. Let's open her up a bit. Fair to say the 6-cylinder ones are smoother, but actually I think this is quite refined for the time. You don't really, it's not punchy acceleration, but it gathers speed very nicely. And as we reach the national speed limit, we can open her up even more. So once we're doing 100 kilometers an hour, which is about 60 miles an hour, it's getting quite revvy, but A, that was kind of the nature of vehicles of this time, and B, it's also possible that the fact it was built for South Africa, it may have shorter gearing because they didn't have a speed limit higher than this in South Africa at the time. I don't know if they do now. So this was probably as fast as you could go. Although it is quite revvy, it's very relaxing. It just feels like it would lope along like this all day. You would definitely tire before the car does. That's a huge part of its appeal. When Tim and I drove it back from Lancashire, we covered a lot of miles that day, and it was a joy, really. It's such a competent thing to drive. It just feels really planted. It's got lovely soft suspension, but it's not like it falls apart when you start cornering. It's majestic, really. It's odd to think of a car that had such appeal to both taxi drivers and executives all at the same time. Obviously the executives would go for a creamy 6-cylinder engine, but those diesel engines were very well regarded. There is one taxi that I believe is in the Mercedes-Benz museum now, having covered 4.6 million kilometers. It was used by a Greek taxi man, and I'm sure there are cars of this ilk out there that have covered even more. There's a little bit of drive shaft vibration. There always has been with this car. Maybe something just isn't quite spot on there, but give Tim a chance. He's been panicking to get the engine working and getting the car to his sister's wedding, so it's been quite involved. But this is just so lovely, just following the 3-pointed star down the road. And I can actually see the passenger wing quite clearly, so it's quite an easy car to place as well. But it just pulls so well without you really having to try the engine. You don't often seem to need full throttle. It's yeah, really nice. Into the 40, and a bit twisty. Suddenly feels a lot more planted than the earlier cars that still use swing axle suspension right up until the 1960s. It's one heck of a car. But yeah, here we are, top gear. It's just pulling so nicely and so cleanly. It's got 93,000 kilometers on the odometer, but we've no idea how many times that has gone around in its life. But it does seem to have survived in remarkable condition. Has been repainted at some point in its original blue, but yeah, it's an incredible survivor. And if you find foot operated wipers a bit odd, there was definitely a time where that was a thing. I think some Alfa Romeos only had foot operated wiper control. Some Citroens had foot operated washers. So it's not that unusual a thing, and I think it's just typical. They want you to be able to do this while driving without being distracted. Marvellous. No need to take my hands off the wheel. There's only really one complaint I can level at this car, and that is the steering. Because they want to keep it light, it means to get to full lock, you've got to turn it and turn it and turn it and turn it. And the turning circle is very good, but that is a lot of turning. Let's let the lock off. There we go. All of the lock. Well, I have to say, like every other time I've driven this car, that was very, very pleasant. It's just extraordinary how well a car of this era can drive. It truly feels like it's built to go absolutely anywhere. It's just got a feeling of robustness. It's sadly lacking with more modern Mercedes-Benz equivalents. This really is when things started getting really good, and I think that lasted all the way through at least till the 80s, possibly the early 90s. But it's so stylish with it, and it's these stylish looks that helped it have such an amazing production history. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget you can head to the HubNut store, look at our fourth wall store if you would like a tools hoodie, and we shall see you in a future video. Farewell.